Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Anthony Moreno. Last month, legislation to expand and extend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act expired, leaving many in New Mexico and other states wondering if the federal government will ever include those in their communities who say they were impacted by radiation exposure from nuclear testing. Our guest today has spent years collecting stories and data on how residents in communities surrounding the Trinity test site say they have been impacted by radiation exposure. She has collected many personal stories and surveys on the impact of radiation exposure in these communities. Please welcome Tina Cordova, co-founder of the Tularosa Downwinders Consortium.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I look forward to answering your questions and educating your viewers.
I want to talk with you first just about the legislation. Now, this actually had bipartisan support in the Senate, but it failed to get taken up in the House. What were your immediate thoughts once you heard the news?
Well, I was angry, frustrated, disappointed. I've been doing this work for 19 years, and we've had bills introduced in Congress for 14 years. And it wasn't until 2023 that we got an actual vote in one of the chambers, which was the US Senate, and the bill passed the US Senate then. And then it was as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. And then it was introduced in 2024 as a standalone bill. And it actually gathered up 9 more votes in the US Senate, and it passed with a vote of 69-30, which is more than a supermajority, and which actually, communicates that it has very strong bipartisan support, because this is not a partisan issue. And just to recognize, Senator Cruz from Texas voted for this, and you mentioned the people of New Mexico being affected, but let me also remind you and your viewers that Texas benefits from this because Texas has uranium miners, and the original RECA bill only covers uranium miners that mined up until 1971. And for those who mine afterwards, it does not cover them. And so there are interested parties in the state of Texas when it comes to this legislation.
Now, can you talk with us about the legislation and how this piece of legislation would be extended to include so many more communities who are impacted by uranium mining, nuclear waste, and fallout from nuclear testing?
You bet. I have already sort of described that the original RECA bill only covered those people who worked in the uranium mining industry up until 1971, but nobody who has ever worked in the industry after that. And it's not that the industry became safe to work in, it's simply that that's when uranium became commercially available, because we started the development of nuclear power plants. So the government said, we're not going to assume responsibility for people who are harmed in this industry after 1971, because we're not the sole user of uranium. Then there are those communities who have been conspicuously missing from this legislation, like the first people ever exposed to radiation any place in the world, the people of New Mexico. If you draw a radius around Trinity in increments, and we've done this using the 1940 census data, they've always said that the area is remote and uninhabited. But the reality is there are 13,000 people living within a 50-mile radius of the Trinity site. And if you extend that radius to 150 miles, it encompasses Albuquerque and Santa Fe to the north, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez to the south, and you're talking about 500,000 people. So all of those people have never been included. Their exposure to radiation has never been addressed. It's never been evaluated. We've been basically left here for 79 years to deal with this on our own. But there are also communities that were left out of the Nevada test site. They did 100 above ground tests in Nevada. that spread radiation all across the United States, but primarily the radiation was very focused in the American West, in places like Idaho, that's never been included, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico. New Mexico was downwind of the Nevada test site. This is all well documented. And so we're fighting to add those states, the entire states of Idaho, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and then all of Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, and Guam, because they did a number of tests in the Marshall Islands and overexposed people there as well. There are also zip codes in places like Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alaska, where they dumped waste or did testing, and we're fighting for those communities as well. And so the bill that we've been pushing for in Congress would have extended reparations to those communities.
Would the legislation also include additional types of cancer as well?
We actually tried to get them to include some cancers that we know are radiogenic, but the Congress has been saying for a very long time, and I shouldn't say Congress, so I'm going to be very specific. Republican House members have been very, very reticent to pass the bill in its current form because they continue to say it's going to cost too much. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So adding additional cancers would have also added more cost to the bill. Originally, the bill also included health care coverage, which for people living in rural parts of New Mexico and the American West, the health care component was very important, but we had to strip that out because the estimate was it was going to cost about $150 billion over 10 years. And so by stripping out the health care, we brought the estimate down to $50 billion. And we think that's a very overstated estimate because in 34 years, the program has only paid out $2.6 billion. And to address the costs, let me just say this much. Our government has spent close to $10 trillion on the nuclear program since its inception. We're in the middle of a nuclear arms race right now. We're getting ready to test devices again. And the program has only paid out $2.6 billion over 34 years. That's a pittance in comparison. And in any good business plan, you always have to make an allowance for the worst possible outcome, right? I'm a businesswoman. I have workman's comp insurance for my employees. And why do I have that? In case something catastrophic happens to one of them. And the government has never included taking care of the American citizens, children, women, and men that have been harmed. They've never included a line item in that budget. They basically shifted the cost of this onto American citizens, tax-paying, hardworking American citizens like me and my family.
You know, you bring up an issue there about how this has affected so many families and throughout generations. Can you share with us just how personal this issue is to you?
Well, first of all, we've been collecting health surveys for more than 17 years in New Mexico through a voluntary process. People come forward, share their histories with us, and I literally receive them in the mail every week. These health surveys document these issues, and what I'm going to describe about my family is not unique. And the way that we know that is because of the collection of these health surveys. I'm the fourth generation to have cancer in my family since 1945. And unfortunately now, I have a 24-year-old niece that was diagnosed when she was 23 with thyroid cancer. That's the cancer I had. When I was diagnosed, one of the very first things they asked me was, when were you exposed to radiation? They know that thyroid cancer is associated with radiation exposure. My dad died from cancer. My mom's being followed for a tumor. My sister, my only sister, has had cancer. Both my grandmothers had cancer. My two great-grandfathers died 10 years after Trinity. My dad's oldest sister that lives in Las Cruces just recently went through cancer treatment. Now her son has cancer. You know, my mom's only sister died from cancer. This is not something that's going away for us. I mean, I've lost track of my cousins and aunts and uncles that have died. And I always tell people, they spread radioactive plutonium all across the Tularosa Basin. And the Tularosa Basin extends all the way down into El Paso. And radioactive plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. Yeah. We will never see an environment free of the threat of the potential for radioactive plutonium to be in our environment.
I see. Tina, we're running out of time with you, but I just want to ask you, where do you think this issue goes from here?
Well, first of all, if people want to know more about our work and get involved with us, let me direct them to our website, which is www.trinitydownwinders.com. Where this goes from here, we are lobbying and people are joining from all across the country in this effort. And we are lobbying Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican Speaker of the House, and we are expressing to him that this is something that is vital for the people who have been overexposed and left to deal with it on their own. So I ask everybody to call Speaker Johnson. He represents all of us. Call his office, let them know that this is important to you as a matter of social justice. And I can tell you that what's very interesting about this is that if they pass RECA in the current form, it will affect 59 Republican House districts and only 10 Democrat. And so this is not a partisan issue. The people who've been most affected, from what we can tell, have been Republicans.
Tina Cordova is the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. Tina, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, Anthony, and I'll be glad to come back anytime.
Thank you. Moving on, conservation groups are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Gila Wilderness. Producer David Vasquez III shares more in this Community Connection.
We're here at the Silco Theater in Silver City, New Mexico as part of the Gila Centennial celebrations. The Gila Wilderness, the world's first wilderness area, was designated on June 3rd, 1924, so it turns 100. Today we're here at the Silco as part of the Centennial Speaker Series. So we've got a number of different conversations with different people who are associated with the wilderness, talking about what it means to celebrate the wilderness, problems with the wilderness designation, why we love the Gila, and most importantly, articulating a vision for the next 100 years of wilderness protections. The Gila Wilderness is just over 500,000 acres, starting just north of Silver City. It's in both Grant County and Catron County here in southwest New Mexico. I think the Gila Wilderness is worthy of celebrating always. I think part of the way that we can do that, and part of what conversations have been like this week around the centennial, is just really thinking about what we need to do for the next 100 years to ensure that the Gila is protected. You know, some of the conversations that have happened today in this speaker series that's sort of like about wilderness philosophy have been around the threats that this landscape was experiencing in 1924 when it was designated as the world's first wilderness. And at that time, it was mostly roads. Like, automobiles were pretty new to the landscape. Everyone wanted to go on these like adventurous auto tours. And people started to recognize that if we don't protect these places from the incursion of roads and other developments, they're going to be gone eventually. So that was really the motivation for protecting the Gila Wilderness 100 years ago. The threats that we're facing now are really different. We have climate breakdown and biodiversity collapse, and so I think a lot of these conversations are thinking like, what do we do to ensure that these landscapes can survive and thrive for the next 100 years in a way that adequately protects them for those threats that they're facing now in the 21st century. One of the things that's so exceptional about the Gila is it's the headwaters of the state's only last wild river. The Gila River is free-flowing still. It's one of the West's last free-flowing rivers, and it's also primarily a snow-fed river. So a lot of the predictions for this part of the world are decreased snowpack over the next 30, 50, 100 years. So thinking about what that means for rivers and waterways, which are really the lifeblood, especially here in high desert ecosystems. So yeah, climate breakdown is definitely the highest threat that we're facing now. The organization I work for is called Wild Earth Guardians. We've had a long-standing campaign to protect the Gila. There are a lot of other local and state organizations, New Mexico Wild, the Upper Gila Watershed Alliance, the Heart of the Gila, and you can get involved in lots of different ways. Like the Heart of the Gila, for example, runs a lot of on-the-ground restoration projects, so if you actually want to get out onto the ground and experience the Gila that way and do some work to protect and restore it, that's a great way. You can volunteer with that organization. You can sign petitions to elected officials, letting them know that you want to ensure that the Gila is protected for the next 100 years. But any of those organizations, I would say, is a great place to start.
This November, voters in Las Cruces will cast their decision on whether to raise the city's gross receipts tax 325 thousandths of 1%. Here to share more about what the extra GRT money will be used towards is Chris Favor. He is Deputy Director of Economic Development with the City of Las Cruces. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start off with just the general question. Why does the city feel now is the time to raise the GRT?
Sure. No, that's a great question. Received it many times already during, talking about these things. The main thing is we're looking to set up a capital improvements fund that'll help the city build sustainable capital improvements in public safety and infrastructure into the future.
Okay, so what are the community needs that the city is really hoping to use these funds towards?
Sure. Primarily, the initial phase of these capital funds will go towards public safety. So, for example, one of the main public safety asks is for a joint training facility between police and fire. Additionally, we're looking at a new police station in the downtown area. As you know, the city has grown to the East Mesa. We have the East Mesa Public Safety Facility out that direction, but the police station in the middle of town is very old, and it's very small compared to the number of officers that need to be in the downtown area at any given time. So it's time for a new facility in that area.
How much feedback did you get from residents in Las Cruces on these public safety needs?
So, over the last couple of years, we've been hearing from a lot of citizens, and public safety is definitely a top of mind issue. In conjunction with this proposal, we did do a public survey on sort of what community thoughts are, needs were, and support for this issue. By far and away, public safety was the number one. I think it polled at about 88% of residents, registered voters, were in support of capital improvements for public safety. So it is by far and away the number one issue on people's minds. Additionally, and it's not just public safety, it's parks improvements, it's road improvements. We have so many parks in this community, and there's a lot of money that needs to go into maintaining them and building out that infrastructure within those parks. So it's sort of a three areas between public safety, parks, and streets.
I want to stay with public safety since it's such a big issue in our community right now. That dialogue continues to happen and unfold. Mentioning that this would provide funds for a possible police training facility with the fire department and also a facility downtown. Can you share with us how this can possibly lead to lower crime rates in the city?
Sure. Well, better trained officers definitely equals a safer community. And so making sure that our officers, both police and fires, all first responders, have the best training facilities available to them, that's a top priority for both the fire chief and the police chief as well. So having those officers trained up, that's a top priority. Having adequate facilities for them to be housed in and operate out of, that's also a great opportunity for them. New modern police stations, they're not the same police stations from when we were younger. They're more of like a community space, and it's a more welcoming environment. So that dynamic, that interaction between the public and public safety has changed over the years, and these new facilities sort of allow for that, and that interaction between the public. But basically, having a more adequate trained first responders force is what leads to safer communities, which would leads to more quality of life for all residents.
So you're saying that the city wants to invest in a facility that's going to provide more community engagement with residents that the police department is serving?
Yes, ideally. I mean, in addition to the needs of the police force, the police chief is definitely has a more open attitude towards the community and definitely encourages that engagement. And these facilities, they work to support those efforts. So I see it as a win-win for both, maintaining the police force and providing a welcoming environment for the community to engage with the police force on a daily basis.
Having good public safety in a community, how essential is that for your job in the economic development department?
This is something that we talk about all the time because all of these elements are all things that a business looking to Las Cruces looks at, right? So the crime rate, public safety, that's a huge one. The streets, so they come to town, they're driving around, they're looking at your streets, they're driving on your streets. That's a first impression. You drive by a park, the quality of your parks, quality of life of the potential new employees. These are all top of mind for an incoming business. So all of these elements, they touch on things that impact economic development for the city on a larger scale.
Now, quality of life, that's obviously important to a lot of folks who are looking to invest in Las Cruces, whether it's residents who are perhaps looking to move here or businesses looking to invest in the community. From what you've got from your research and from feedback from residents, as far as the parks go, how can this truly make a difference? What are some of the big changes they may see in the Parks and Recreation Department?
So I can give you a couple of examples. Part of this is to deal with escalating costs of things, right? So everybody knows that prices have gone up, and that's something that the city feels as well. So for example, it's about $500,000 to renovate an acre of a park, right? So it's a very expensive and costly endeavor to get into. So there's a lot of park renovations that need to go in what we call our legacy parks, our Young Park, our Apodaca, some of those other parks. We have 64 playgrounds in all of our parks. About half of them are 20 years old or older. The problem with that is the manufacturers stop, providing parts for those. So at a certain point in time, you just can't maintain them anymore. So having newer, better equipped parks is good for the residents, for kids, the community. Again, economic development definitely benefits.
You mentioned roads as well. What are some of the key street improvements that the city perhaps could invest in?
So we were talking with the Public Works Department when we were putting this information together, and there's about 72 miles worth of road in this community that needs to have not just maintenance, but to be redone. It's a very expensive endeavor. Something like that is about $3 to $4 million a mile to redo a stretch of road. We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to keep all those roads to a point where they can support, the amount of traffic. I moved here in 1990. Yes, the city has definitely grown on the East Mesa, but by and large, the infrastructure, the infill of the area, relatively the same. The population was 65,000 when I moved here. Now it's over 100,000, and so these roads are accommodating twice as many residents as they used to. We need to have the funds to be able to keep up and maintain with the increased demand.
Now, you've mentioned some things that the city wants to invest in should this question pass, but if it does pass, can the city technically use this money for whatever they see fit?
So the intent is to have a dedicated capital improvements fund and to have council prioritize through a resolution the priority projects that these funds will be going to. So that is the intent for the funds. They are general, part of the GRT, which is, the main income for the community. But the intent is for these funds to be earmarked specifically for capital investment.
So the city does have the right to decide where to invest this should it have other pressing needs.
Sure, exactly. I mean, that is the intent. Within the city structure of the finance department there, we will earmark these funds specifically in a fund internally to be used for capital investment, yeah.
So can you share with us a little bit where folks can learn more about this question and find out more resources?
So we are in the process of actually building a new website at the city, but the address is lascruces.gov. All of our content, all the information will be available on the city's website. So look out, a little plug for that. Look out for the new website coming in the next few weeks. There will be a lot of online content. And of course, anywhere you see me on the community talking, you can certainly stop and ask me a question.
Chris Favor is Deputy Director with the Economic Development Department with the City of Las Cruces. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week's program. Remember, you can always stay updated with news anytime at our website, krwg.org. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.